is not to scare you. It's to give you information, understanding that feeds off of and really follows this progression. So you've learned something about how this particular virus has evolved in the human species over the last 3 years. And then you heard a very learned, really comprehensive overview in the span of 20 minutes of the nature of the naturally emerging infectious disease threat. What I hope is that after I'm finished, you'll have a sense that when looking at what has transpired with these polynucleotide genetic vaccines, you will have a sense that there was a logic behind this. And there's a lot of different, I'm going to call them theories or hypotheses. I'm going to avoid using the term conspiracy theories. Let's call them, no, really. I mean, one of my core precepts drilled into me by lawyers as an expert witness is don't presume that you can understand what the other people are thinking. You can't get into their head. I don't really know what Klaus Schwab thinks. I don't really know what Bill Gates thinks. I don't really know what the head of the Bank of International Settlements or the Federal Reserve think. There's a lot of ways to look at what's happened to us over the last 3 years. And Jill and I have spent the last year at least trying to ferret out all of those little rabbit holes in preparing our Substacks and our book. I'm not here to push the book or sell anything to anybody. But we have been on that journey, and I just want to acknowledge that there are many truths about what's happened over the last 3 years that we've all experienced. And my goal here is not to apologize or normalize what the government has done and what the World Health Organization has done and what the pharmaceutical industry has done. My goal is to help you to further your understanding of the nature of the threat that Stephen has introduced you to, and then help you to see through the lens of those that are trying to promote technologies to mitigate that threat. So I'm going to use kind of different language than you may have been familiar with, but it's the language that Stephen and I deal with on as we worked with the government past decades. So up until the end, there were a number of bioweapons developed and deployed: tularemia, plague, smallpox at various points in time, many different pathogens. Those have all, of course, been rigorously cataloged by the people in the government that do these kind of things. And programs have been developed to produce those pathogens that have been actively used as weapons of war up until the end of really World War II. Now, if everything goes right, no major hiccups, and there's already been a number of them, the US government's biodefense enterprise is on track to have vaccines for all of those biothreats up until the end of a full century. You laugh, okay, this is real. This is where we're at. With standard vaccine technology, if we're lucky, we will have vaccines for all of the known biowarfare agents up until the end of World War II by 2050, a full century after those threats manifested. That's the problem that the intelligence community, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is functionally the developmental arm of the CIA, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which has two main branches within the Department of Defense, Threat Mitigation Branch and ChemBio. The threat that they're trying to address, that they're focused on in their threat scenarios, is not only these emerging infectious diseases that Stephen has identified, but the threats associated with engineered pathogens. Now, how big of a threat is that? Well, we just saw an example of scientists, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, thinking they were doing good science at Boston University
And in fact, what they were doing was generating another engineered pathogen. In the press, the starting virus, Wuhan, in that mouse strain causes 100% mortality. So saying that we now have a recombinant that causes 80% mortality is not kind of the way it's been pitched in the press, if you follow what I'm saying. But to just help you to comprehend, I think it's now public, it's no longer secret, classified. The United States government spent more money on biowarfare agent development than they spent on thermonuclear device development. The head of the American Society for Microbiology for years was the head of our biowarfare program. There is a school of thought that the reason why the Soviets were really stopped, and they had a threat, which was basically blitzkrieg from Soviet tanks in Europe. And we had no way to stop a blitzkrieg, Soviet blitzkrieg, before it hit the English Channel. Even neutron bombs wouldn't do it. We came up with a binary bioweapon that would do that. It's so powerful that it will kill tank crews and tank commanders before they reach the English Channel. And it neutralized that threat that had huge geopolitical strategic implications. What I'm trying to help you to understand is that we are in a world in which biological agents are a very potent weapon. When you hear the talk, the technology is now at a point where bioweapons can be engineered so that they are relatively select characteristics. They can select potency in different genetic populations, which is to say ethnic groups. This is real. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this so that you can comprehend the nature of the threat. Now, let's put those two things together. 2050 to get countermeasures for everything that was weaponized and used as a weapon of war up until the end of World War II. Obviously, that is just not acceptable in the current threat landscape. And for better or for worse, the government is trying to address that threat. Now, I disagree with a lot of the decisions that were made. I think they've destroyed the potential of this technology. I think that throughout the world, and we're hearing it in Uganda right now with the Ebola outbreak, people don't want to accept an RNA-based product. It didn't have to happen that way, but it has. They pushed it, they rushed it, a lot of things went bad, and we've all lived through it. But it's helpful to understand why. And like I said, there's a lot of theories, and there's no question that there is a lot of documentation about various organizations and parties that believe in a depopulation agenda. I don't debate that. But that isn't the only hypothesis. So from the framework of threat mitigation from the government to engineered biowarfare agents, engineered pathogens that can be produced using stuff that you can buy off of eBay. That binary bioweapon that I mentioned, I'm not going to tell you what the components are. That is still classified. That can easily be replicated in a garage by a young person with a rudimentary college education in biology, using stuff that he buys off of eBay. That's where we're at. Like I say, I'm not meaning to scare you. I want you to comprehend. So in the face of that, we need to have, the government believes, and world organizations believe that it's necessary to have technologies to mitigate that threat, which can be developed and deployed very rapidly. You can appreciate this. Imagine if you're a SEAL team, you're special forces, and you've been told that you need to deploy, because this is new military. The new military is not big armies and big tanks, although we'll see how that plays out. But their logic is small strike forces. And they want to have the capability to protect small strike forces if they go in to mitigate a biologic threat, and to do it promptly. They wish to have a capability to go direct from genetic sequence to a countermeasure. There's two general classes of countermeasures that they think will meet that need. One is genetic vaccines, in particular DNA and RNA vaccines. And the other one is monoclonal antibodies. They actually prefer monoclonal antibodies. Monoclonal antibodies have the advantage, if you think about a strike team, you can engineer the monoclonal, cook it up, purify it, inject it into the warfighter. They can go in theater, do their business, come back out, see their wife, the monoclonal antibody's gone. As opposed to a vaccine, you've altered that warfighter forever in terms of their immune system. They prefer not to have that. But we've all seen how the monoclonal antibody technology has worked out. Not so good. It's kludgy, it's expensive, it's time-consuming, and pathogens rapidly evolve to escape it. The reason why they went with mRNA technology is because it is one of two main platforms that allow you to go very rapidly from a genetic sequence of a virus, a new virus like Stephen was telling you about, or an engineered one, to some sort of a vaccine product, a threat mitigation. And they tried to do this with DNA, based on the stuff that I was involved in inventing back in the late 80s. Merck spent billions of dollars to try to do that. It never worked. It works great in mice, doesn't work in humans, okay, for a variety of reasons. And DARPA, remember I mentioned Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the functional operational development arm of the CIA, which has a mandate that they don't take on projects that are a sure thing. They want projects that have about a 20% probability of success. That's what they fund. And they pulled the RNA technology basically out of the trash can and decided, we're going to push this and see if it works, how far we can get it to go. And so they funded a group of companies, and one of them was called Moderna. Moderna is absolutely a product of CIA funding, okay? And the new RNA manufacturing plant in Canada was funded by In-Q-Tel. In-Q-Tel is the CIA's venture capital arm. Okay, so it's coming out of the intelligence community. That's not a lie. It's verifiable. And they believe that if they can build a platform technology where you only change the sequence of the polynucleotide, the sequence of the RNA, you keep everything else the same, then you can go really rapidly from the new influenza virus or the new chikungunya or whatever pops out of the forest or pops out of a bioweapons lab to a product literally within a couple of weeks. That's what they believe the need is. That's the kind of mitigation technology they want. What they did, and the documentation is becoming really clear now. In 2020, there was a meeting at the World Health Organization, 2021, headed up by Margaret Liu, formerly of Merck, that came up with a plan for how these vaccines would be developed and deployed. And it appears the reason why they used a surrogate RNA, luciferase, the RNA that makes the firefly tail glow, is because they weren't really just developing a product for SARS-CoV-2. They were building a platform technology that they could use for anything. How do we know that? If you go on clinicaltrials.gov right now and do a search for RNA vaccines or mRNA, you'll find there's over 50 clinical trials at various stages, phase 1, 2, and 3, currently enrolling for mRNA-based vaccines. And none of those have had to do new preclinical data packages. The safety, toxicology, and all that is being grandfathered based on the very crude, inadequate, 'inadequate safety studies that were done before this vaccine. And the governments all over the world agreed at the World Health Organization that they were going to try to push this forward very aggressively because they needed a platform technology to enable rapid response. And what they did was not only build a technology and platform that could really shorten the timeline for the manufacturing process and grandfathered in the non-clinical safety, toxicology, biodistribution work, none of which was done properly, okay, just to say it. But they made a decision that they would cut short the clinical trial period, which normally takes up to a decade. They made a series of decisions, for whatever reason, that the norms of vaccine development that have been implemented by treaty internationally over decades, they were just going to ignore those things. They were not going to do the human toxicology. They were not going to do good dose ranging. They were not going to do careful step-down clinical trials. They were not going to follow the norms of at least 2 years follow-up on at least 3,000 subjects for each of these new vaccines, because of the logic that we had to do something right away. And they're now taking what has been done all over the world and use that as the justification now to cut short all of those normal non-clinical tests and to shorten the time span on the clinical phase, which, as I mentioned, is usually a decade and typically over $100 million. And the reason is, I believe, certainly from the framework of the intelligence community and the governments all over the world and the World Health Organization, that the threat that Stephen has described to you is so significant that we have to have something, and it's basically out of desperation. That does not justify, in my opinion, what was done. It does not justify the suppression of the rights of the individual, the fundamentals of medical ethics, the fundamentals of informed consent. I'm not saying in any way this is justified, what we've experienced, but what I've tried to give you is an understanding of why this technology at this time, with these shortened timelines and abbreviated processes, and to alert you that what's currently coming down the pipe is it appears that over 50 new vaccines are already in clinical testing using this platform, and a total of 200 clinical trials. They're now extending this platform to medicines, RNA as a drug, for cancer and everything else. And they are grandfathering in, if you employ the formulation technology of these lipid nanoparticles, and you don't change what was done in the product that we've all experienced, then they're not going to make the companies go back and retest and redevelop. So what that does is it creates a monopoly for the companies that already have this technology deployed. It creates a situation in which Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and potentially CureVac have platforms for mRNA as a drug and mRNA for vaccines that third-party competitors can't break, because they would have to come up with their own formulations, their own testing, demonstrate their own safety in competition with these people that already have existing technology. So that's where we're going, and it's part of the whole. As a vaccinologist, frankly, I knew that there was a lot of corruption in the system. What we've seen, and we just saw last week with the CDC votes, is a level of corruption that astounds me. It's almost boring. It's so pervasive. I don't know how we're going to fix it. But I hope now with this little talk, you have a sense that this wasn't just random chance. It wasn't just Klaus Schwab wanting to kill us all. It wasn't just Tony Fauci. You have to understand, Tony Fauci sits at the apex of the entire U.S. biodefense enterprise. That's why he gets his big salary. He basically took over the mission space that DoD had been working on and brought it over into Health and Human Services. And where the other thing where this is going that you need to be aware of, when you hear these words like transhumanism, there's a new division within NIH that's just been created called ARPA-H that is going to be focused on things like implantable technology, prosthetics, transhumanism, genetic engineering of humans. And I guess I'm going to leave you with, number one, I hope now this makes more sense to you, that might have been confused about why this is happening. And I hope that now I also leave you with some empowerment as you talk to others and think about politically what we can do to recapture norms. Because we're in an environment where the folks that are thinking about these threats, thinking about threat response, have come to a belief system that the benefits for the population outweigh the needs of the few, which I've been told by Holocaust survivors is exactly, I'm going to say it, it's exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. That the rights of the many are more important than the rights of the few. And at a fundamental sense, somehow our government and the world governments have come to the point where they believe in this utilitarian principle that the rights of the many supersede the rights of the few. And this is diametrically opposed to the fundamentals of bioethics, as we've all agreed on them since the end of World War II. And somehow we've got to recapture that, and in my opinion, and reinforce and ensure that logic, that the rights of the many outweigh the rights of the few in medical development and deployment is just not acceptable. So with that, I leave you. Thank you for your attention. I hope this was helpful, and look forward to talking in our Q&A.